You're listening to a special presentation from Night of the Living podcast, Zoned Out, the Twilight Zone Revisited with Freddy and Joe, and today's special guest. Welcome back, the Professor David Perlmutter, author of Policing the Media and Blogwars. Hey, welcome back.
Thank you so much.
Man, this episode, I was so surprised. I watched these on a Blu-ray that our friend Kyle got for us that has all these extras on almost every episode. There's commentaries and whatever. None for this one. And it's such a deep episode.
You'd think there'd be all kinds of them for this because I'd never seen this before, and it blew me away how impactful it was.
Yeah, it's a really great episode. Maybe in the top 5 of the series, I think. But Professor, please.
So that's very interesting because I've wondered about that for the last 45 years or so. The questions you're raising, if you ask people about, like, what's your favorite Twilight Zone episode, as we've discussed, the answer for students today is different than maybe when I was watching late night television 45 years ago, is that while not everybody has seen every Twilight Zone episode, they have the meme, they have the reaction video, they have the clip, so they can say, oh yeah, the one where the old guy's glasses break, and we just fill in the blanks immediately, right? And for some reason, and I have a theory about this, but we can talk about it later, but this is not in the pop culture top 5. It's in everybody who's a Twilight Zone fan and appreciator of, like, the brilliance of the show and the issues the show raises and the influence of the show on 500 other IPs. But for some reason, it does not have that same popular culture space. And you just mentioned it. I to tell your audience, I didn't prompt you to say that. You independently pointed that out as much younger people who are watching the show. So I think that's very interesting. We can talk about it later.
Yeah, and thanks for saying much younger.
If I can jump into one aspect of that, I just recently saw somebody do a little YouTube short on this, and they said it was kind of this question of, like, why is it that the generation Gen X, late Gen X, early millennials kind of have an interesting connection between old media and new media. And it was a really, this guy went into it deep, but the basics of it was, when we were growing up, we were just transitioning from network TV to cable TV, and all the cable channels and the network channels themselves had to kind of fill up a lot of extra time on these channels with something. And so they bought a bunch of licenses for the old media and started just playing that and on all these different stations. And so our generation got exposed to a lot of much older media that we wouldn't have necessarily otherwise. And because it was all, you had to watch it, live, you didn't have TiVo, you didn't have on demand. It was, and we didn't have, VHS and DVD weren't popularized then. We became aware of a lot more really old media that maybe others wouldn't have had that exposure.
Yeah, that's something really important, that when this show was made in the early 1960s, what I like to call the tragic economics of Hollywood was very different for television. First, as we talked about last time, shows like Star Trek, which have earned, $500 billion for the owners. Unfortunately, not Lucille Ball. She sold the rights, but there's a whole story there, right? But they were unpopular shows that were slashed. Their budgets were slashed, and then they were canceled. And why? Because back then, they only were paying attention to numbers of eyeballs. That's it. They didn't care about demographics. So if they cared about demographics, Star Wars, the original series, would have been a massive hit just 10, 15 years later, because they would have said, oh my gosh, educated, upper middle class college students, what a great audience. Let's keep this show on the air, right? But then the second part, which is the tragedy, is nobody thought about reruns. Nobody thought about, like, Blu-ray and physical media and streaming and buying series. So a lot of these shows, you have to remember, they really thought they were only going to be seen once. That's something to take into account when we're watching them. And the actors didn't get a cut. It wasn't part of the union contract. It wasn't part of like agent negotiations. So I grew up with a lot of tragic stories, like the Star Trek people. I went to a Star Trek convention, my one and only Star Trek convention. It just before the Star Trek movie came out. Those guys were poor. They were literally doing opening of electronic stores saying by Grabfar's hammer, what a savings. I mean, right. that was what Galaxy Quest was all about, right?
Yeah.
And they were not making any money whatsoever from reruns when reruns started and the show got super popular. So that's really something to take into account, is that the show was not meant to be. It wasn't conceived as something as people would watch over and over again. And yeah, I'm a little older than the generation you're describing, but I watched it like an episode. They'd have they started to have the Twilight Zone marathons, and you get to watch a show 3, 4, an episode you loved. Yeah. This one, for however, just doesn't have that presence. And I cut you off, but go ahead. I just want to put those two sort of economic lenses there.
Oh, it's great context for everything we're talking about. The Shelter is the episode. This one aired September 29th, 1961. It's the first of 8 episodes directed by Lamont Johnson, who is going to come back to do 5 characters in search of an exit, Nothing in the Dark, One More Pallbearer, Kick the Can, 4 o'clock, Hocus Pocus and Frisbee, and Passage on the Lady Anne. He was born in Stockton, California in 22, and he's best known for Wallenberg, A Hero's Story from 1985, the film Lipstick, and Lincoln from 1988. He was married to Toni Johnson. He first performed in radio drama, and then he was an announcer and acted at the Pasadena Playhouse. During World War II, he was classified as unfit for military service due to health problems, but worked with the USO entertaining troops in Europe. He had tuberculosis of the leg as a child. That was the illness that followed him. In the 50s and 60s, he made a name for himself as a director working on this show, and then later on made for TV movie and miniseries. He also directed this movie, his oddball sci-fi movie from the 80s called Space Hunter: Adventures in the Forbidden Zone. You know about this, Prof? I see you nodding. Did you see this one? I take it you've watched the movie.
Yeah, I saw this one, and then I'm 100% sure there's a Mystery Science Theater 3000 on this one too, because it was so. It was definitely a made for Mystery Science Theater 3000 movie.
And that's funny because I went looking for either a Riff Tracks or a Mystery Science Theater of it, and I couldn't find one. But in my memory, it might be like a Mandela effect thing, but I thought there was one too.
Anything with the word star in it, So.
Right.
Forbidden.
Excuse me. And this episode was written by Rod Serling. Setting, it's going to be the Stockton home exterior, their dining room, their basement, and bomb shelter. And we have a cast of 12, including Serling. The characters are Dr. Bill Stockton. This actor's from St. Paul, up in Joe's neck of the woods.
Woot woot. It's here from Minnesota.
That's Larry Gates. He was a character actor. He gained fame on Broadway and Bell Book and Candle. He continued acting until 96, but he had health problems nearly his entire career. He appeared in 4 films that were nominated for the Best Picture Oscar, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, The Sand Pebbles, In the Heat of the Night, and Airport. Of those, In the Heat of the Night won. Then we have Grace, his wife. This is Peggy O'Rourke, Floridian who moved to Los Angeles after they went on vacation there and was like, I love this place. So she started a life there. And then went on to being in almost 30 films, Westerns, all kinds of stuff. But when she left the studio system, she struggled and eventually just retired and just did television and theater. Paul Stockton, this is the 12-year-old son. Michael Burns, he's a former child actor known for his role on Wagon Train. He transitioned to a career as a historian and professor. He was considered for the Monkees. They were going to cast him in the Mickey Dolenz role. He tested for it, but I guess he didn't make it past that round of casting. And then his career became what it is. Jerry Harlow, this is Dr. Stockton's best friend and neighbor. Jack Albertson is the actor, a former vaudeville performer. He's best known for his Emmy-winning role in Chico and the Man, and his Oscar-winning performance in The Subject Was Roses. He was also Grandpa Joe in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, which is what I know him best as, where he takes Charlie, his grandson, on the wild tour of Willy Wonka's Chocolate Factory, and then they burp together to safety. Then we have Martha Harlow. This is Jerry's wife. This is Joe Helton. She's going to come back in on Thursday. We leave for home. She's best known for Dumb and Dumber 2. I thought it was an odd best known for credit. Father figures in this, of course, the Twilight Zone. Marty Weiss is his neighbor and a guest at the birthday party that opens the story. Also, we believe he's an immigrant. And judging by the name origin, I'm sure that the professor probably will have some things to say about that. We'll get into it. Mrs. Weiss is Marty's wife. They have a 3-month-old baby and a young child. This is Moria Turner, who was born in... oh, no, my notes didn't include that. Sorry. She's known for Ben Casey, The Twilight Zone, that's, of course, and Table for Five. And then we ran out with just the last few here. It's Frank Henderson, who is a guest at the birthday party and a closeted anti-Semite. Second of 3 appearances by Sandy Kenyon. He was the navigator in the Odyssey of Flight 33, named Magellan, and also in Valley of the Shadow. Then we have his wife, Mrs. Henderson, third and final appearance of Mary Gregory. She was in The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street in The Lateness of the Hour. And finally, there's a character who does not have a name. He is just man. He appears at the doorway with a transistor radio in the middle of everything. That's the first of 3 appearances by John McLiam, who will appear in The Midnight Sun in miniature. He's best known for First Blood and also in Cold Blood and Sleeper. So I think we could get right into the meat of the story if you're ready, Joe.
Yeah, I think so.
Let's do it.
All right. So we open up, and this is what I found after watching this a few times, that we open up on a jovial rendition of Happy Birthday to You, which it's funny because the Twilight Zone episodes do so much signaling with their music that I thought, okay, well, maybe this is like a cheerier episode or something. Well, no. But we kind of pan down from this neighborhood and then into this house, and we hear the sound of laughter and conversation. There's a party going on, a house party, a dinner party, and we open up then on a 2/3 eaten birthday cake that looks like it has the words "Happy Birthday, Doc." That was somewhere on there, and someone tapping on a glass to make a toast. And so we pan out to see a party around a dinner table, and everyone finishing up their dinners together, and everybody's kind of having little side conversations. So while all of this is going on, it's kind of this boisterous party. So they're all having a great time, and you can see each of the characters are kind of interacting with each other differently, in different ways, but they all seem to really care about each other, and there's a lot of goodwill passed around. And the gentleman tapping the glass, this is Jerry, proclaims that no birthday celebration is complete without an after-dinner speech, the honoring of Dr. William Stockton, and then everybody at the table applauds. And I actually took all this down verbatim here, so I thought it was kind of interesting, this beginning relational dialogue they have. Bill, the doctor, says, "Now, Jerry Harlow, you sit down." They do that kind of old-timer, like, you rascal. And Jerry says, and so he's still talking to Bill, who today is 1 year older and admits to being over 21. And everybody laughs. And he says, and who in the short space of 20 years has taken care of not only us, our children, but even our grandchildren. And Martha, right next to him, his wife, is like, whose grandchildren? And he just ignores her and keeps going. As a matter of fact, I doubt if there's a single person in this room who still does not owe the good doctor for a visit or two. And Frank, the closeted anti-Semite, is off to the side, and he goes, what about the hammering at all hours of the night? That's another thing we owe him for. And everybody kind of chuckles, and And Jerry says, yes, the good doctor's bomb shelter. Well, I'm afraid we'll have to forgive him for all that, despite the fact that what the good doctor thinks of as far-sightedness on his part has been a real pain in the neck to the rest of us. What with all the concrete trucks and the nocturnal hammering and all the rest of it, and he kind of clears his throat. And Professor, looks like you had something to say.
Yeah, there's something I have to explain to my students when they watch this episode. In fact, anything from the early 1960s, there's going to be certain cultural facets and like even objects, that you have to say what that is, right?
Right.
And one thing that I guess this has become popular culture now is that I need to explain to my students that these are actually not very old people.
Mm-hmm.
Like you see the doctor's child. I don't know. He reads like 8 or 9 or something like that.
12,
right?
Yeah.
And yeah. Go ahead, please.
Oh, I was just saying before or later 12. That he's 12. Yeah.
12. Okay. Yeah. I forgot the detail. But there's just something we've talked. This is a popular culture discussion all the time. But my students are always shocked by this, about how old people looked back then compared to today at ages. Like if you look on TikTok today, or really anywhere, you'll see people who are 55, but people who were 55 in 1960 looked 75. And it just doesn't read the same. So I have to say, like, these are not meant to be. This is not meant to be at a nursing home. These are like people in their 40s and 50s, normal. They had their kids in their 20s, which a lot of people did in the 1960s, 50s, and it just reads a little off, and I have to explain that. And then the second thing, which is more relevant to the actual theme of the episode, the first rule of bomb shelters is don't tell people you have a bomb shelter. And this is, there's an entire massive genre of prepper fiction, and in fact, there's some good podcasts out there, including one that I did on prepper fiction. And within the genre of prepper fiction, which the shelter is. Like, one of the things you want to make sure of is your neighbors don't know that you have a bomb shelter, that you have like a escape room or something like that. You're supposed to keep that as a secret. So the idea of and he kept us up at night with digging and things like that. That sort of that threw me a little bit. And again, I had to explain to my students, because they've grown up with prepper fiction where people have secret bomb shelters, and we can talk about the 50 media properties where somebody's had a bomb shelter, but it was a secret and nobody knew about it. So I thought that was interesting that everybody knew about it. Because all the moral dilemmas and ethical dilemmas that are set up are based on everybody already knowing my neighbor has this stuff.
Yeah, that is interesting. It's usually is just a big secret, and more modern stuff. I guess a modern audience is more cynical as well, be less trusting of their neighbors.
Yeah, it's interesting. We'll get into that a lot more of this too, of the other components of this that I think a lot of audiences are not familiar with. The bomb shelter in and of itself being a facet of American culture of this time, especially. But there's when we get up to the next part here, I dig into that just a little bit. So he's still giving the speech, and he's kind of giving him guff back and all that. And so everybody laughs about the fact that this was hammering and everything was going on, and everybody's kind of chuckling around the table of kind of snickering, he built that thing and we all put up with it, but we're okay with him. The doc's okay. And so Jerry continues, well, at any rate, when Grace mentioned that it was the good doctor's birthday, we all decided to take a hand in the proceedings. And Bill says, yeah, I had an idea something was going on. And Grace is like, no, you didn't. And he goes, oh, yes, I did. So they have this back and forth. And Jerry continues, and Doc, as a little personal aside, I'd like to conclude this way. And Bill says, well, that'll probably be the best part of the speech. So that they do the traditional guy banter at each other in that age. And Jerry continues, Doc, you're a very beloved fellow, and rightfully so. And you may not have the biggest practice in medical history. And Bill says, well, that's true. But I can assure you that there isn't a single sawbones in the entire 50 states whose patients have such a regard, such affection, such respect for their man with the little black bag as we do for ours. And everybody applauds. And you know, by the way, sawbones is an old term for a doctor, but you know, it's one of those things you got to catch in there.
And a little black bag. I have to explain.
Yeah,
right.
And also, you got to mention
house visits.
Bones on Star Trek is short for sawbones, right?
Yeah.
There you go. And then I only threw it in here because it always stands out to me now as such a weird anachronism, but I know it still happens. Bill, the guy who his birthday, he stands up and he goes, "You dirty dog," and he shakes his hand and he's like, "First a surprise party, which I abhor, and then that sloppy, sentimental speech. You ought to be ashamed of yourself." And of course, everybody's laughing as he's shaking his hand and smiling. So it's just this weird not patriotic. What's the word?
Guy banter.
Yeah.
You know, I always call it guy defamation fund. You know, although that is interesting though, because fast forward to the 40-year-old virgin. Do you remember the scene where the two guys are playing video games and all they're doing is knocking each other down? You know, just saying. I won't say the word they're using as an insult, but like they're just insulting each other. And I in the world of gaming, just continuously, yeah, you loser, yeah, I'm beating you, loser.
Right.
It's part of competitive hierarchical male banter, I guess, whatever you want. It's clinicalized.
Yeah, it's some aspect of patriarchy that I've never really enjoyed.
It's that you old so and so. Yeah, it's like when you watch when they're at riff tracks, they're always like, "You son of a! I read your book, you magnificent bastard."
Yeah, it's got to be this weird jockeying for position, which I don't know. I've always struggled with that, but that's a personal note. So,
well, losers do think that way. That is right. So,
wow. See, we can't even have a conventional conversation without being subject to it. So they're all refreshing their drinks, and I should mention they probably had a few drinks in at this point. I didn't think about that until a couple of viewings. I'm like, oh yeah, they've all been drinking. It's not like they're drunk, but at least one of them, Frank, was like staggering for his drink. He seemed stumble a little bit as he kind of goes over to it. So they're
2025 alcoholics,
right?
But they're 1960, a few drinks after dinner, normal. I mean, again, it's fascinating to me to see through the eyes of 18-year-olds, because like one of the things they ask me is like, is this an alcoholics meeting? You know, like because they noticed that,
that's amazing.
You know, that something they wouldn't even want their friends to do, going out for a party. These guys, like, this is Thursday night,
right?
In the suburbs.
It comes out. It's. Oh, go ahead, Bill.
I was just gonna say, as an ex-smoker, it's sometimes a challenge to watch the show.
Oh, yeah.
It triggers like cravings because I grew up in the generation where everybody smoked, and then and now nobody smokes. But boy, in the Twilight Zone, everybody still smokes. Yeah.
Rod Serling, unfortunately for him, I mean, I the last time I read about this is the thought that, he was a combat paratrooper, I said, super fit guy, and he died of a heart attack. And there's, retroactive thought that his 5 packs a day, which is incredible when you think about it today. Like I know no human being who smokes, and I've never seen any 18 to 22-year-old on campus smoke. So, I mean, it's disappeared from like middle-class culture, and, but everybody was smoking back to the doctor. The first thing the doctor does is take a puff, Yeah. Remember when they had advertisements, 9 out of 10 doctors smoke Camels or whatever it was?
Well, actually, this episode was sponsored by Chesterfield's.
Yeah, Chesterfield.
Jeez Louise. I can't remember which media I just saw it on, but somebody was commenting on something, and then they said, "Oh, and I don't trust doctors who smoke." I was like, that's something.
That's a good point.
So they all are starting to retire, and I love this. Yeah, they've all been drinking, they've all been smoking, and then they decide at 11 o'clock, it's time to go get some coffee in the other room, because that's what you did. So get some uppers with your downers. And then as they're moving over there and kind of still talking, Bill's son, Paul, comes in and he says, "What is it, Paulie?" And he says, "Well, I was watching TV and the picture went out, and then there was some sort of goofy announcement, and Marty. So this is interesting. I love the interplay of the little character aspects. Marty, the one who later we find out is an immigrant of some sort, is the one who kind of tells everyone to quiet down. And whereas Bill refers to him as Paulie, Marty comes over and says, "What did you say, Paul?" He just very kind of like draws the attention to him, which I think even in that time was a little unusual to have that kind of, I don't want to call it deference for a kid, but like just kind of calling it, like listening to exactly what he said and calling him Paul, just a little more respectful. And Paul repeats that, the announcer said, "Turn to the Conelrad station on the radio." And Bill's like, "Are you sure?" And he's like, "I didn't mishear it, Dad," or Pop. And so they go, and I looked this up, and we'll get into this in just a second. I'll clip to the next part as Bill turns on the radio and they heard the radio broadcaster. But I looked up Conelrad because I hadn't heard that phrase, and that was stood for control of electromagnetic radiation. It was a method of emergency broadcasting to the public in the United States in the event of an enemy attack during the Cold War. It was intended to allow continuous broadcast of civil defense information to the public using radio stations while rapidly switching the transmitter stations to make the broadcasts unsuitable for Soviet bombers that might be attempting to home in on the signals. This was done during World War II when German radio stations based near cities were used as beacons for bomber pilots. So it's like you'd think of this as the emergency broadcast system now, but at the time this was the methodology.
And it's James Coburn's voice.
Oh, is it? I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so we hear this broadcast come on, and the announcer says that message from the president at 11:04 Eastern Time. There was unidentified flying objects flying southeast towards the U.S. We hear, announcing a state of yellow alert, advise people to move their supplies to their shelter or basement. And as you're hearing this, the couples one by one are kind of filing out. First, Marty and his wife leave for their home, then Jerry and his wife, and finally Frank and his wife leave. And as we see the last couple run out, we pan outside with them, and we hear the sound of planes flying overhead. And if those who aren't familiar, this kind of attack, it wasn't just an unidentified object. This was clear indication of a nuclear attack. And that was the expectation in the 60s. My dad even would tell me in the past, he remembers being in class in elementary school, and they would do duck and cover drills where you would get under your desk and cover your head to, protect yourself from a nuclear bomb, which he said it didn't have anything to do with actual safety. He's like, but it was about creating some sense of you could do something that wasn't absolute panic in the midst of all that, which is just wild.
One thing I'd like to add here is that for people watching it at the time, and maybe less so for today, the clock is ticking now.
Yeah.
Like the show has begun. It is, you could be minutes away from disaster. And that's one thing, I grew up at the end of the Cold War going to school, the 80s. When some of the threat was reduced, but still, I'd say 1 out of 10 people I knew had a bomb shelter. We still had some civil defense, but it wasn't the intensity of the 60s that you're describing. But one thing that was always made clear in any civil defense, and certainly we got it told to us in school, was that you didn't have a lot of time. Because by the time that they made an announcement to civilians, if you recall watching, for example, The Day After, where they actually sort of take you through what happens in a nuclear war, I believe it was about 30 to 40 minutes for missiles from the Soviet Union to reach Kansas. Right? So it wasn't like, within the next week, you might want to think about doing something. In fact, I can think of movies. There's a great movie, The Day After. Everything happens within like 15, 20 minutes of screen time anyway. Testament, other movies where you physically see a nuclear explosion occur. Fallout. They do that at the beginning of Fallout. It's very quick. So you were told the countdown has begun. Like, you can't, like, call everybody, and like have a meeting on Thursday to discuss, like, run now. And I'm not disagreeing with your dad. Your dad was always right on everything. But
no, he wasn't.
Let's face it, if there was a nuclear explosion, especially on the choices he disagreed with you, but whenever one of the biggest issues was blindness from the explosion. If it came close, being hit by fragments of windows. So, getting under a desk was not just theater. There was a little bit something there, but certainly the point is that right now, Conal Rad has said, you have minutes to get going. There, the countdown has begun, and it's only a 22-minute episode, right? So, like,
right.
Things are going to go quick here. The audience at the time certainly would have felt that way, like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Boom.
And what's interesting is this might be the longest time between when the episode begins and when the voiceover or Serling's introduction actually happens. And so as we hear those planes fly overhead and the last couple leaves the house, we pan to Mr. Serling, and he says, what you're about to watch is a nightmare. It is not meant to be prophetic. It need not happen. It's the fervent and urgent prayer of all men of good will that it will never happen. But in this place, in this moment, it does happen. This is the Twilight Zone.
It's a great intro.
So in the next scene, we have Bill, Grace, and Paul all collecting water and supplies, moving them into the shelter. They prepared. They had a plan. They knew what to do during this. And in the midst of their collection of stuff, they're getting flustered, and it's interesting to see Bill, the character, reassuring each of them as things go along. The water stops flowing out of the faucet. They filled up everything they can, and Grace gets flustered and accidentally drops one of the jars of water she's getting, and he goes, "Easy, easy, honey." He said, "Now make believe it's perfume, and it costs $100 an ounce. Maybe in an hour or so, it'll be worth even more than that." As water being one of the few things that once you're out, and that's it.
That's a very mansplaining thing. Today, that reads as really misogynistic and sexist.
Oh, yeah. Very
what would you replace it with? I'm sort of curious. If you were writing the episode today, it's
real maple syrup.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Guzzolene.
Yeah.
The finest champagne.
Yeah, I would, something to the effect of like, this is going to be, worth its weight in gold in a matter of, it's going to be worth more than gold because you can't live on gold.
Bill's like, imagine a world with no lipstick.
Yeah. Well, this is a good throwback to the Great Heist, the Rip Van Winkle caper.
Yep.
A previous episode where they had gold, but not water, or water was a previous resource. So anyway, there's another moment where Paul asks a question. He's like, well, Bill asked Paul, his son, to go get his bag. And Paul's like, well, what about books and stuff? And Grace like snaps at Paul and is like, your father said to go get his bag, And he's like, relax, everybody calm down. He's like, you know what? We're going to need books. We don't know how long we're going to be in there. So go ahead and grab all that stuff and bring it down. So Paul goes up there, and they're looking for light bulbs, but in this moment, Grace realized she was going to buy them when they were on sale, and she didn't get a chance to get them. And, everybody's kind of panicking. And so
do you think Paul returns
each of these moments?
The books he returns with are all Mad Libs.
Dad, I found these magazines under your mattress. Should we bring those too? So as they're going back, they're now kind of settling into the shelter and getting everybody down in there. And Grace at one point is kind of reflecting on, well, why are we even in this shelter? Like, wouldn't it just be easier if we just died with everyone else? And in this, their son Paul comes and goes, grabs one more thing, and he goes, we have to do it for him. Like, he's 12. He doesn't, hasn't had a future yet. That's why we have to do this. That's why we have to survive.
Could I ask you, I wanted your reaction to this, because I've had discussions about this episode probably for about 30 years. In fact, I discussed this episode because I watched it with my dad. My dad and I would watch Twilight Zone together. And my dad was in the Navy in World War II. Very capable guy in many aspects. And the first thing he said is, that guy didn't really prepare. I mean, we're told in the episode, Bill Stockton, he's been digging all night. He's been doing all this stuff, but you shouldn't have to move anything.
Right. Yeah, it should be in there already.
You shouldn't have to, I forgot to shop for, biscuits or something like that. That should all be up on the shelf. I'm thinking of I'm blanking on the actor. I shouldn't be, again, sign of age here, but in 10 Cloverfield Lane.
Oh, John Goodman.
When the woman gets stuck with the prepper below, and he's got these shelves where everything is organized and alphabetical and fiber content or whatever. This is not. He's not actually. He's a play prepper today by our standards.
Yeah,
he's not a real prepper. He's not a professional prepper.
Have you seen those 5-gallon doomsday buckets that a lot of the televangelists sell, or at least Jim Baker did?
Yeah. Oh, geez, yeah.
It's just
the industry, and of course these prepper books are very interesting because now they're including SQR codes within the book. Talk about making additional funding from your self-published book is that you can when a character in the book says, well, it's lucky that we bought our 1,000 bullet mega pack from the Night of the Living Dead supply company, and you can actually scan the SQR code to order the 1,000 bullet mega pack. So we had today. This is what's fascinating to me is that we don't live as much. I mean, there are some existential threats to our society. Russia could still go nuclear on us, right? It's possible, but we don't live under the same relentless, oppressive umbrella of imminent destruction that people in 1960s did. But we are so far past them in our prepping.
Yeah. We got real good at everything.
Interesting. Well, I wonder too, you could play this episode, you could justify it a couple different ways. Maybe he just wrapped it up because that's what they're complaining about, right? He just finished it and haven't actually loaded anything in there, but hey, now's the opportunity.
There was a knick-knack on the shelf, which I thought was strange.
Yeah. They had time to put all the little memory pieces up there, but
I think there was just one little porcelain piece, which I guess was the human touch.
Yeah. I think that the keeping in touch with that your humanity is that's the key piece of this, right? That's the element of this whole episode that starts to unveil itself because moving right along, we as they're getting their last items, they're settling in, and Bill is like, "Oh, I forgot something. Hold on a second, let me go grab it." And he goes up, and as he's getting the last jars of water and such, there's a knocking on the window, and we see that it's his friend Jerry who gave the speech at his birthday. And again, this is just a few minutes later. And I should mention that when he was talking to his wife Grace, he said, "There's time. And what he said was basically, from the time that Conrad makes the announcement, they estimated between 15 and 30 minutes before something happened. And they didn't know where the missile might attack or this or that. But she's like, we're an hour. I think she says we're 40 minutes or something like that from New York. And we know New York's going to get bombed. So she's like, and we're going to get it. So that's part of their discussion of why continue. But now Jerry is knocking on the window, and Jerry comes in and he's like, hey, we've got everything in this brand new house except shelter. We don't have a basement even. It's got everything we need except for this moment right now. And what I really need is your shelter. So can I bring over the kids? He's like, I'm sorry. No, I've got enough space. It's a 10 by 10 room. He goes, we have enough air. We have enough filtration, water, all these things for my family. That's it. That's what we built it for. I told you guys when you were doing your dinner parties and all this stuff, I said, take a little time and prepare for stuff that could happen, but you ignored it. You went on. You were the what's the ant and the
grasshopper. Yeah.
Grasshopper. Yeah.
I mean, that was an exact literary reference to the ant and the grasshopper, which is a moral quandary fable. Like you're supposed to ask the question. Like, I mean, that I've been having a discussion about this for a long time. And obviously, every single during apocalypse, coming apocalypse, and post-apocalyptic has some version of this dilemma, right?
Right.
And good people can side with either extreme. Like, yeah. I mean, everybody's right in this scenario, right? I mean, yeah. Do you want to invite the whole neighborhood in? I mean, this is the whole thing, right? It's interesting to me what Rod Serling's point is here, because I'd love to get your guys' take on that. But like right away, it's established that there's an ethical dilemma. Now, some people would argue, no, there's no ethical dilemma. The moment the bombs are falling, your duty is to take care of your family and not sacrifice your family for everybody else's. So I mean, you can go. I'm not one of those that says like there actually is an ethical thing to do here or not. I'd love to hear your guys' take or something. I mean, I think there's cases for multiple decisions at this point. If you were Dr. Stockton.
Well, and it's interesting. Before you answer, Freddy, the first one to come over is Jerry. Then Marty comes over with his wife and kids. Like the whole family actually comes over. Jerry leaves to go get his wife and kids. And then Jerry returns with his wife and kids, and then Frank with his wife and kids. Like, so everybody shows up in turn, and they're all trying to argue with him. You know, hey, come on. So now, well, I'm curious. Like, what are your feelings on it, Freddie?
Well, what you described is the Lay's potato chip defense, right? If I give one to you, I have to give one to everybody here. As the old ad was. Look it up on YouTube if you don't know the commercial. It's funny. Actually, they flip it in The Simpsons when they did Bart's Comet, where season 6, I think, and Flanders has the bomb shelter, and he does let everybody in, and Homer says, "Nope, Flanders out," after he lets him in. So I think that it's funny, but it's also kind of like somebody seeing days down the road what the reality is. Do you make a decision based on what your current reality is or what you imagine you're going to end up in? And I think part of the reason I'm framing it in a really dark way in my imagination, because I just watched this old Uwe Boll movie called Stoic that is a true story about these 4 prison inmates that the 3 of them decide to start torturing the 4th one. It's a real dark movie. And Uwe Boll stuff is mostly just terrible, but this movie was like a very earnest and dark. It was kind of like a Rashomon kind of way of retelling what happened. But I started projecting that into, okay, these are all very warm people, right? We believe them to love one another, but then that's not really true because Frank is harboring these feelings that whole time. So what happens when you're locked in with Frank and you're the vices, you know?
Yeah. It's interesting. I feel like the closest thing I've ever come personally to this kind of experience was the beginning of COVID. And I think a lot of people are going to tie back to that experience of going through it. I remember distinctly when just after they had that same day they announced that COVID was like they're going into full lockdown mode, that all the kind of things that were going to be happening with that. I went to Costco that night, and every meat, if you've ever been to Costco, there's food everywhere, right? That night, every single refrigerator unit was empty of meat with a couple of exceptions. There was like maybe a couple pieces here and there. Every roll of toilet paper was going out the door. They were limiting it. They were selling gloves. It was freaky. It was really scary because you knew this was a big deal happening. And Well, it was very civil. I mean, I was, again, Minnesota. Okay, just a little side note. I'm just really proud of how Minnesota has represented itself in the last couple of weeks. For those hearing this later, with everything going on, I won't go into it, but I'm happy to be a Minnesotan because they've been holding themselves to a good standard of bonding together as neighbors. So, but that experience, everyone was civil, but as you're leaving, you're thinking, should I have grabbed one more thing of meat? Should I have grabbed one more roll of toilet paper? Should I grab one more bottle of water? That fear, it starts to creep in, and you have to play that guessing game of, well, how much is greed and how much is self-preservation, and how much of it is caring for my fellow neighbor. How do you balance all that? Because you don't know what the outcome is, right? So you don't know where to build in for your own survival, let alone anyone else's. It's scary.
It's heavy. It's weighing on me, just I guess the memory of what you're talking about. And I'm like, yeah that was something else.
And part of it is something we've talked about before about, remember in Galaxy Quest, the character who was an extra on one of the episodes of the fake show Galaxy Quest says, did you guys ever watch the show? And then more recently on Pluribus, we have a character say, we've all seen this movie before. So there's two kinds of apocalyptic or fantasy media, are ones that recognize they're within a certain genre, that what's happening has happened before, and then ones where they don't recognize that. So in The Walking Dead, I think at no point does anybody say, yeah, I've watched a lot of shows with zombies before. They just agreed not to pretend that they live in an alternative universe where there's never been a Walking Dead TV show or movie game before, right? With The Last of Us, I think even though it's based on a video game, nobody says, I played the video game. And at this point, we really should be. But sometimes, I was giving an example other times, sometimes people go wait a minute, I'm in a Groundhog Day time loop. Wait a minute, this is a post-apocalyptic scenario. And they use culture, media, games, movies, televisions to process there. So one of the difference, obviously, between an audience watching this in the early 1960s, on the other hand, they had been overwhelmed with messages of imminent doom, like nuclear war is the thing that we should be worrying about most. On the other hand, the people in a bomb shelter reacting was a relatively recent genre, right? There just hadn't been that many. But now we've had so many. And it was interesting to me during COVID how, for example, name the TV show, game, or movie made before 2019 where toilet paper was a commodity that was fought over as much as what happened in the early days of COVID, where there was anger, people selling toilet paper by the side of the highway, toilet paper became a unit of exchange, nobody, no science fiction writer, no TV writer ever thought okay, forget water. Toilet paper will be the commodity of choice. Forget gold, forget bullets, it'll be toilet paper. Yeah. So that it's interesting how science fiction predicts some things, but not others. But I think today, haven't we sort of already pre-programmed that moral dilemma more because we've just been through it and we've seen it so many times? I don't know whether there's still that level of moral dilemma anymore. I mean, maybe if it actually happened, we would have to do it. But people, I think today would be more inclined to look, I got to take care of my kids.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you. I think that's more common sentiment is the world is so big. I think we feel the world is so much larger probably now than we did then too. So you're well, I think that's part of that nationalism versus a global mindset, where, people who it speaks to closed borders and everything else, I believe, the same idea on a larger scale.
And it's interesting that this piece of it that that you just referred to as the like would we invite more people in? What would be the expectation? And if we're going more that it's going to be each person for themselves, I think there's also a realization of the actual fallout of a lot of these things. Like, if there's a nuclear uh, bomb that's dropped, realizing that survival is going to be a terrible experience, right? And I don't know how many people I've talked to, joking about, my girlfriend once explained that she's sticking with me because when the zombie apocalypse happens, I'll be useful. So I'm good to hang on to. It's a new rating system for partners. But
the term from Last of Us is capable, and so like this is funny because like again, this is a conversation we have with our students, and I swear, using the term capable, people have come up with like, yeah, my friend, he's really capable. In a zombie uprising or apocalypse or something like that, he would be really capable. And one person actually said, and I've had this conversation with other fathers too, is like, what's our filter for a son-in-law? And one of them would be, yeah, he would really be very helpful, post-apocalypse. Like I could see.
That's a good filter.
Maybe that's an old fashioned. I mean, in fact, I imagine a TV movie or just a movie or something like that, where it's something like Meet the Parents, like a modern version of Meet the Parents. The father would sit down and say, Joel, you don't really strike me as somebody who could be capable post-apocalypse. So I'm just not sure I can approve of this marriage.
Right.
You could build an entire comedy around that premise alone.
It's a comedy shorthand for, well, you'll survive, or these are my judgments on you. But there's nothing to it, right? I mean, there's something. It's still a judgment. It's still an evaluation on somebody's ability to survive on their own. You mentioned about the other prepping thing, and there's a comedy a few years back on Netflix called The Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, where she goes into a bomb shelter, which is reminiscent of this. This was all a doomsday cult thing, but it's a funny story. I mean, it's dark, but it's interesting. And then she comes out later, and she's been in this shelter for however many years, grown up there, and her whole life exploring the world from there. But it's a great twist on what are our expectations? What are generationally? What do we expect? What are we living life for? What's the purpose of life? And so I'm reminded of that whenever I think of any bomb shelter at all, but especially in tying to this, like, what's our point for living? Why do we want to go on?
I think of the bomb shelter from Grease 2.
I've never seen that one.
The guy uses it as a bachelor pad. And yeah. So there's that. We're a different class of people, Joe.
I don't know. I like that we can still get along.
A real dirtbag. No.
So, well, I mean, hey, I would, if the bomb shelter's not being used for anything else, you might as well keep yourself entertained, right?
That's true.
So in the midst of all this, one neighbor after another starts coming over, and it starts out with like a pleading, right? They're saying, "Hey, Bill, look, you've got enough space in there. Why don't you let us in?" And then he says, "I can't." And then they start to dig into him and start to cut into him and say things like, "Well, you're a doctor. Marty comes over and says, "You're a doctor. You might survive this, but I feel bad for you because you're gonna have blood on your hands." And the doctor says, "That was 1,000,000 years ago. 1,000,000 years ago." It's a really interesting, like, cut there as the doctor is thinking about the implication. It's clear that both of them, that Marty is panicked because he doesn't have a shelter, but the doctor is realizing he's still grappling with the fact that he's got this and the others don't, and now he's having to hold that and defend why he's in there by himself. And those people, they were my friends 1,000,000 years ago. That was my life before, and now it's a totally different experience. Which is, it's a really shocking realization as you can see, he's put a clear demarcation line of like, nope, everything that happened before now, that was before. That was a million years ago.
When he's given that monologue, it would be neat if he were also suiting up like a Mad Max road warrior, just pulling like shoulder pads on and lacing up.
Putting the black makeup under his eyes.
Right.
And, yeah.
There's something else too. And again, I'm not like, I have no notes to give Rod Serling retroactively, like you should have done it this way or something. But so in television, in movies, 1930s, 40s, 50s, through the 60s, certainly early television, certain characters read like certain stock types. And Marty, based on the actual physical actor and his name, reads ethnic, right? Anybody who wasn't Dr. Stockton, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, reads ethnic of some kind. And of course, there were certain ethnicities and nationalities that you didn't see, but just like in the episode 2, it wasn't specified that Elizabeth Montgomery plays a Russian, but she speaks Russian. I mean, bad Russian for some reason, but
yeah.
but Russian. Marty reads ethnic, and the one thing I was sort of disappointed in was I didn't feel that there was a strong differentiation between the neighbors. Like I just didn't notice that they were like different points of view. They were neighbors, and I felt some of the dialogue was interchanging. I mean, there obviously there was more, and you'll talk about this now, but there was a character that was, to me, missing. And I don't know if you saw the movie Testament, which is another during actual nuclear attack. It's a beautiful movie based on a novel about a family just outside of San Francisco. Jane Seymour, no, gosh, I'm blanking now again. I'm terrible at this. But like it's a family, and the father goes to work in San Francisco, and then there's a nuclear attack. And you're seeing the slow unraveling of this friendly neighborhood where most people stick together and are helping each other. There's very few villains. I mean, if somebody steals some batteries, it's because they need them, or something like that. But in any case, there is one older woman there who is the piano teacher of the town. She teaches all the kids in the town to play the piano, and she is keyed as a Holocaust survivor. And her attitude towards this about like how people have to stick together or will fall apart, and things like that. It's just, it comes from a different view than the average, American who's, our country's never been invaded since 1812. And, we just don't have the same, there's been a lot of discussions in many TV shows, but also in real life about, other countries have different views of like, something that you call paranoia in America might in very other countries just be called justifiable distrust because it's based upon, thousands of years of good examples of enmity and things like that. And so I just, the one thing that I felt was missing there was somebody who was sort of halfway in between the clamoring neighbor and Dr. Stockton, somebody saying like, yeah, I get it. I'm asking something that I shouldn't be asking of you, but I'm desperate for my family to survive. And also the European, because we just gone through World War II. I mean, the show was literally made only 15, 16 years after the apocalypse of World War II. And I thought that could have been brought out a little bit more with just one character being an actual refugee, which I'm Marty Weiss, from Europe. I don't know was it ever specified he was
name,
like a refugee?
Well, not in as much. I think the reason that I think that's supposed to represent Serling or Serling's father, maybe even, is that he's a Russian Jew, I believe is where the origin of the name is. So I think that might have been a pointed choice to name him Weiss because it's associated more with that ethnic group. And so to me, I think that's supposed to represent the Serlings, that family.
What's interesting, I just looked it up, and Weiss originates from German and Ashkenazi Jew in Middle High German, meaning white.
There it is.
Yeah, it's very. I mean, like a lot of Jewish names, very German. You know, it has a German, Middle European origin. I'm not going anywhere with this except to say that there were a lot of World War II movies. There's a famous poster from World War II. Your audience can look this up. That shows these mechanics working on a Sherman tank. And like one guy is doing some welding, another guy is doing, putting some bolts on it. Each one of them is identified as Italian. They're given names which read like this is, Umberto Cipollini, right? And then there's actually a black character working on there too. In again the same work, blue work uniform, everybody else, and like I think he's Ernest Johnson or something like that. And there's like Marty Weiss, right? And there was this whole point in World War II, like we're all working together. Let's put aside racism and nationalities and whatever. We're all working together to build this tank because we need this tank to win the war. And I'm just sort of curious why television is different. and they were so afraid. The television people were so afraid because they wanted these numbers of eyeballs. They were so afraid of breaking certain social conventions that unless anti-Semitism or racism or sexism was the actual topic, it tended to be very evened out. And I felt, Serling felt he could cross some lines or get close, adjacent to some borders. But in this one, I guess he just felt he couldn't do that.
I think you've definitely nailed it, because I know that he's said in later years his frustrations with the network, they wouldn't let him be as literal at times as he wanted to be, and he had to tone things down to please them.
Yeah. And well, so as we see more of this interplay too, as each family's coming over, and the story moves along, they kind of have retreated from the door directly, and they're talking in the living room or in the dining room, which is interesting. They're all arguing over the dining table or around the dining table that they had just eaten at and had this jovial conversation. And there's this great moment too where the parents are like, barking back and forth. And they clip to one of the kids just reaching out and taking a piece of the cake and eating it, just like the kids are just there because, the parents are arguing whatever, but like, they're just going to go, oh, here we have cake. Oh, I would like some cake, just that like, childlike perspective. But as the parents are talking, they're kind of arguing back and forth, and we see Frank reach out and bark about. Oh, sorry. First, they're trying to decide what should they do. Should they go start building up somebody else's basement? And I think that's what Jerry starts that argument of like, hey, let's just pool all our resources together. Forget this. We'll let's just make the most of what we can. And that's something that actually Bill had recommended at one point. And as they're arguing again, Jerry, Jerry comes back, and at one point after Marty had been down there, and talks to his wife before he comes back with his wife and with the kids and the wife, and the wife says, Jerry, ask him again, Jerry, and she's like pleading and like pushing him, and you can see that kind of aggression and anger and frustration and all that emotion on her face, and he's like he's not going to change his mind, and eventually with all the kids and all the families, they all come back to the house. They're arguing over the table, and they're like, well, maybe we can just argue with them and say maybe we could just draw lots and just one family could join them. And Frank reaches over the table and it says, oh, maybe like your family could go in there, and what's his name
Marty.
again? Marty. Thank you. Marty is like, well, like, yeah, why not my family? And he's like, well, you're the lowest of us. You're no good. And he's like, well, we've got a 3-month-old baby. And he's like, your baby is more precious than my kids. And so they're all kind of arguing for themselves. And he's like, Marty's like, I never said that. If we're just going to argue about who lives and who dies. And then Frank says, shut your mouth, Weiss. And he starts talking about how, well, that's the way it is with when foreigners come over here. Pushy, grabby, semi-American. And it was like, ooh, that was the...
Yeah, that's the word semi there.
Yes, exactly.
That's as far as they could go. You can imagine when he was writing the script, he was thinking like, well, I can't actually have somebody use an expletive, I can't. I mean, television was interesting because you never heard actual racism, sexism, anti-Semitism, anti-anything in the express terms that people would actually do it, right?
Yeah.
You had to dance around it, and so I love that he used the word semi.
Yeah, and phonetic triggering too, a little bit.
Well, to your point, Freddie, the thing that Marty replies with is not "you bigot," it's "you garbage-brained idiot." And I thought, ooh, brained idiot. Well, that's...
He's not going to say "you white supremacist." Until again, I mean, you got to give Serling credit for like going to the border of where he was allowed to travel, and maybe even stretching that border a little bit. But he did operate under certain rules. He had to, right? Or the show would not have been on the air.
Right.
And
as simple as that.
Frank's wife is the one who comes back with Frank, who yelled that comment. Her wife comes, for my dough, you're at the bottom of the list of like who should go. And it's like, whew, I mean, they're just tearing each other apart. And this is where Jerry, and I think Jerry may have been an attempt at that moderating factor, because he does come back and he goes, look, you're just going to slaughter each other. We're just going to tear each other apart. And later on, he's talking about how he's the one who suggests maybe we should just pool our stuff together in a basement. And then later on, when they're talking about breaking down the door, they start talking about breaking down the door to this room. And Jerry's the one who's like, oh, sorry. They're talking about breaking down the door, and then we're like, we'll go to so-and-so's house and we'll get the pipe from there. And they're like, well, how are we going to explain that we want the pipe unless we tell them we're trying to break into here? And he's like, oh yeah, because we can't reveal, because this is our shelter, and he's giving it back to them. He's like, y'all, this is not our shelter. You can't, you got to patronize home industry. Yeah, you got to take it into our shelter. And so he's pushing back on them actively, realizing this is madness. And so I feel like he's more of the moderating force without Bill arguing behind him. And Frank is the more aggressive force that keeps advocating, we're going to go, we should go get a pipe or something to break in here. And Jerry is pushing back, and he's like, I want to live too. I want to see the morning sun. You're all fools. You're all idiots. And you're acting like a mob, and a mob doesn't have brains. And Frank comes right back with, well, I think we get a battering ram, and I think we should go back. And then Marty comes back with, well, I think we should stop a minute. I think Jerry's right. And he starts speaking slower too. And then Frank comes right back with, I don't think anybody cares what your kind thinks. And he says, I think the first order of business is getting you out of here, and punches him. And like there's a moment of violence. And then Frank grabs his stuff and he's going to grab that pipe. And everyone follows him. Even Marty follows him. And they all come back together with that pipe.
Destroy that birthday cake.
Right. They come charging back into this big piece of pipe, and they knock over the table, destroy it. The cake goes flying. So that's symbolic, right? But all of them are carrying that pipe. Not just Frank, not just Jerry, but like they're giving into it. And so they all come back.
And this is a great writing by Serling, because so one of the books I wrote a long time ago was the history of the visualization of warfare. And I'm just interested in the portrayal of warfare in media and portrayal of violent conflict. And we know that if you want to unify a group to work together, the best thing to do is to have an enemy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
to work together. So you think you saw the little concentric circles here. They have come together because they want to get into the shelter. And then the ethical dilemma for the Stocktons are, do we let these people in the shelter? And then these people are arguing about getting into the shelter, but they want to exclude a circle around them to not get into the shelter. And then, if they had brought in those other people, maybe those other people would say, well, we can't tell the people in the next street because then, so it's not simple, right? Again, the Serling, sometimes I felt sometimes he's a little maudlin, he's a little simplistic, but in this one, he's got these tranches of ethics where you feel like you go like, well, okay, I guess the ethical thing to do, which if an ethical person would do, would be X, but then he challenges that right away and says, okay, would it be, well, then what would be the extrapolation of you doing that? Because all ethics can't be only situational. It has to be extrapolatory as well, right? It has to ask like, okay, if you do this ethical thing, right? Like it's the old thing. It's like somebody on the street asks you for money, and like the immediate ethical to do is like, oh, you look like a poor person, I will give you money. And that person says, great, I can now buy some more drugs. Thank you. I mean, right. So like, I mean, what we don't know. We don't have enough information to make a real ethical choice in that situation. But here we can see the cascading problem that's all set off by the fact that everybody, there was one grasshopper. If there was no grasshoppers and only ants, it would work out great. If there was no ants and only grasshoppers, it would work out great. But because this jerk built a bomb shelter for his family.
It's kind of like if the other two little pigs decided to break down the third little pig's door. You know, they're like, there's a wolf out here.
It's like, well, yeah.
Or everybody just owned a gun,
If everyone's
simply
armed.
There's no guns in the pigs universe, apparently. So.
Well, and to use your example of the choices too. My mom used to always say, when someone would ask for money, she says, I always give it to them, and she would get the argument. Well, what if they're going to buy more booze or drugs? And she goes, I've never had to beg for money. She'd say, I don't care what they use it for. They deserve something. They deserve a little piece of happiness, a little something, whatever they're going to use it for. Fine, as long as they're not hurting somebody else. And again, I realize that this is it's a whole spectrum. But I love the idea that what she threw into there was decide to what degree your principles make your decision. What is it that is most important to you that you're trying to emphasize with your decisions? That always.
I think that's a great observation, and also it also has to do with like what we as individuals can do, right? So, for example, in class, we are so overwhelmed by how evil and toxic social media is, and I teach social media, so I make it a point to try to balance. Like, these are the 900 destructive things that social media does to us with, like, let's take some good examples. Like, there are people out there, I don't know if you've seen this guy, he mows lawns for older, poor people, and he just mows their lawn and for free and tidy up their lawn. And people rescue cats and, like, bring awareness to, diseased, unhappy cats, and I've written the show there. So there's one clip that just sort of reminds me of this. I just showed it like a couple of weeks ago, and I think this is Minnesota actually, where I lived part of my life, because there's a police officer, and it's a body camera view, and most of the body camera things you see are of unhappy events, but this one was. They were called to a Walgreens. I swear to God, this is St. Paul or something like that, because everybody had a little Minnesota accent. And the officer was like with a Scandinavian name. And, when I taught in Minnesota, I noticed that, one half of the class was Olson. So I just, but
not an exaggeration.
But anyway, there's a woman there, and she's a young woman, but she looks really beaten down, just like life has treated her badly. And she turns out to be like 22 or something, but like, she has not lived a very good life. And the store clerks caught her shoplifting. Well, what she shoplifted was a woolen cap and gloves. And the officer comes and says, like, you know, they saw you put them under your coat. They have cameras. If I have to go back and look at the cameras, I'm going to have to arrest you. So you really need to tell me now. And the manager of the store says, ma'am, if you give back the property, we will not charge you. We'll ban you from the store, but we will not charge you. So this really, I just can't tell you the sadness in her eyes, where you look at somebody, you go like, wow, at 22 years, you've lived a very tough life. She says, well, I'm sorry. Yes, I did. And she opens up her coat, and she does have a hat and gloves, you know, with the price tag still on and all that. And the officer says, okay, you know, if you need help, you just need to call somebody. Here's some numbers and things like that. And then he turns to the clerk and says, I'll let me just pay for these. Okay. And, you know, we'll just walk you out. You can't, you know, the store has the right to say you can't come back, but like, you know, we'll get you a hat and gloves. And so that was it. This is a little moment where this police officer and, you know, the police department I studied, by the way, for a year and a half was the St. Paul, Minneapolis Police Department. I'm sorry. So the St. Louis Park, St. Louis Park Police Department. So I have a great love and affinity for St. Louis Park police officers, but they did that a lot. And this is before body cameras, so there's none of it was recorded. They did a lot of helping people. They did a lot of charity work out of their own. The department didn't reimburse them for the things that they did. But the point was that in those situational moments, you can say the chances that she's going to sell that in this Minneapolis in January, that she's going to take that hat and gloves and sell them for drugs is pretty low. Right. So like, I can do this charity and pretty much feel the odds are I'm just going to help somebody be a little warmer in the winter. That's it. Right. But the unfortunate part about life is that a lot of times we don't know what are, again, it's my job as a professor to say, what are the long-term consequences of a decision that is made for media characters or on the news, right? Like a policy of the government or the foreign policy or something like that. But we know that, you know, a policy by the British government in 1812 may very well have led to this war in 1892. I mean, we can play that game with history. I think Serling did a fantastic job of talking about all the multiple levels of possible consequences, how complicated it is. He didn't sit in judgment. That's what really I came away with. Now, again, I'd love to hear your view on this. My students tended to agree there weren't bad guys. And I mean, yeah, somebody who's obviously a jerk, racist, is a bad guy. Although, you know, even in my heart, I always think like, can I talk to you about this? Like, where does this feeling come from? You know, why do you believe this? I in my life, I have had many conversations with people who hated me because of who I was, and I had great conversations with them. You know, and I haven't changed people's mind necessarily, but I'm willing to have a conversation with anybody. You know, because it's my job to have a conversation. But I just feel Serling did this really good job of saying there wasn't bad guys versus good guys. That wasn't the point of the episode.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you. Yeah, definitely. I didn't get any villain vibe because, especially the way the denouement works out, you kind of feel when the civility starts to try to ease back in, if it ever will.
So let's address that in the story. That is, they come back with this pipe and they're breaking the door down. And mind you, it's interesting. There's 6 guys at the end who are breaking that door down, and I was like, okay, who are these other guys? They must have been the other guy that they got the pipe from. He's probably with his family or whoever.
Transistor radio.
There's several guys. More than just the main characters from the dinner party. So they break down the door, and you know, Bill and his wife and Paul are just kind of waiting in this room, and just as they break through and they're kind of clamoring in to get in, there's another announcement on the Conelrad broadcast, and they say, just pause for an announcement. We've identified the objects. They were satellites. There are no missiles incoming. We are going to cancel the emergency yellow alert, and everybody's grateful and you know, so relieved that there are no missiles incoming. And then it all settles in. And you see one of the first things that happens after everybody's kind of hugging each other and crying is Frank, who yelled at Marty, comes over and punched Marty, comes over and says, I lost my mind. He said, I went off my rocker. He said, I mean, you can understand all those things I said. I didn't really mean them. And later, Jerry, he said, we all blew our tops a little. And I think Marty's not going to hold it against you, Frank. And Marty's not making eye contact with him. He's facing the other direction and he's just kind of looking down. And then he says, and Jerry says, just the same way, I don't think Bill's going to hold it against us. And he turns to Bill, who's now emerging just with a 1,000-yard stare as he comes out of the shelter. We'll pay for all the damages. He's, I think we should have a block party. We should have a party and just celebrate the relief from all this. Anything to just get back to normal, right?
Those people are going to have a real hard time getting refills on their medications.
Well, the thing I kept thinking about after this is what happens next, right? What are the next pieces of this? And just to wrap this up, basically, Bill says, normal? He goes, I don't know what normal is. He's like, I thought I did once, but I don't anymore. And so he kind of walks off and he's just reflecting on, and Jerry says, well, we pay for the damages, Bill. And he goes, damages? He goes, I wonder if any of us really realize any idea what the damages really are. And that's kind of closes out the episode. And they go on from there. Who knows what they're, when we revealed our real normal selves, normal being under this pressure cooker situation, under the skin, and he goes, I mean, all of us, which is interesting because he's not calling out just Frank. He's not calling out whoever else. He's just he's calling out himself too. Cause you could see some of the reflection in his conundrum of but I can't, I'm cutting these people off from a lifeline. I'm condemning them to death.
Yeah, you got to be a little mad at me. I understand.
And then it closes out with Serling's outro, which is real simple. He just says, no moral, no message, no prophetic tract, just a simple statement of fact. For civilization to survive, the human race has to remain civilized. Tonight's very small exercise in logic from the Twilight Zone.
Excellent.
It's only 23 minutes. I mean, isn't that amazing what we've packed in discussion? But also like this guy Rod Serling, this genius of a medium that at the time there was a famous FCC commissioner, I think he was Newton Minow, who said TV was a vast wasteland. I mean, television was not regarded as a place of art. Right? Hollywood stars would avoid television. It was now you see them on advertising all the time, but television was the ill thought of younger brother of the really Hollywood movies and so on. But Rod Serling was one of the pioneers of this could be art. This could be high, beautiful museum quality art there. One thing from the perspective of the history of war, and I apologize, but again, Rod Serling was a paratrooper. He was, served in the military, came out just like Gene Roddenberry. Gene Roddenberry was a pilot and was in a terrible crash, and wanted to change the universe. And some of the decisions he made was based upon his military service. And so that whole generation of writers and actors, most of them had either served, or you gave the example of somebody had served in another capacity, served as USO or entertainment or worked in the war industry, right? Like my dad's generation, my mom's generation. For the United States of America, the bombing of Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, was a trauma that I don't think we've really recovered from, because you have to understand that before December 7th, we assumed that the oceans would protect us.
Mm-hmm.
That was a very American feeling. In fact, the America First movement, Charles Lindbergh, the which had some very strong negative parts of it, like evil parts of it, anti this, anti that, did have this one component of which goes back to George Washington and his inaugural addresses about, like, America should not involve itself in the conflicts of the old world. Like, we shouldn't get involved in what's going on in the rest of the world. We should just stay here on our own. And so isolationism had a little bit of you think about, like, villains who sort of had a point, like the idea of, like, let's not get involved in the wars in the Pacific. Let them fight it out, because that's what had been happening for centuries, right? European wars, Asian wars, and America had stayed out. America then gets involved in the Spanish-American War, and we start having colonies. But the Japanese bombing of Pearl Harbor was sort of a signal, like, no, in a modern era of warfare, no one is safe, right? And immediately we started thinking about American cities being bombed, like we saw Chinese cities just earlier, or we're seeing London being bombed. The famous broadcasts of Edward R. Murrow, "This is London." Somebody who was very contemporaneous in his thoughts and ideas with Rod Serling. And so part of the horror of nuclear weapons was that this ability of America to be uninvolved had been erased by technology. That just some Soviet bureaucrat would make a decision, and 30 minutes later, no Minneapolis, no Kansas City, no Dallas. And we couldn't do anything about it.
Right.
Because there was no defense screen. Right. The only defense screen was that we also had mutual assured destruction was the theory, right? That like the only thing stopping the Soviet Union from launching missiles was that we had missiles too. That we had some anti-missile capability, but basically we knew that most of their missiles would get through, or bombers. We had bombers and submarines too. So it was just he says it's a small story. But that was the point. It's like you couldn't tell the big story. I mean, there were certainly movies like Failsafe and Dr. Strangelove, which tried to tell the story on a grand scale, like the president and the premier of the Soviet Union having phone calls and big maps and things. But for individual American families, and I assume Russian families, I've had talk with people who grew up in the Soviet Union and Poland or whatever at those times, and the horror was just so inexpressible. And here's Rod Serling on television, this sort of silly medium of the time, telling this dark, but really important story. Just glorious.
The question is, will that ever come to TikTok? Will there ever be a TikTok that it will be held in the reverence of an episode of the Twilight Zone? I don't think it will happen. That's the old man in me talking, but I don't think it's going to happen.
I'm really curious about, as we go through these, you talk about generational trauma, mentioning World War II, specifically Pearl Harbor. I know for people in my generation, we talk about 9/11 being that moment and what happened with that and all the outcome of that. And I think a lot of modern generations talk about how they're, I've got 3 kids and their experience growing up of what is hanging over their head, the political unrest, the global war strife, the global warming, all the different environmental stuff, all the stuff that's kind of hanging over their heads as things that need to be resolved. Everything from "We Didn't Start the Fire," Yeah. We were talking about that song the other day, and I think I kind of looked back to previous generations and what did they have and what was their experience. And I think of, okay, well, in the 60s, it was the bomb weighing over everyone's head. And it's, I imagine there's always something that's kind of looming over, but it seems to have just intensified. And kept thinking as we were talking here about, you mentioned about talking to folks who grew up in the Soviet Union, of that song Russians by Sting. I hope the Russians love their children too, about that song about mutually assured destruction. And it occurs to me, like it strikes me again of like, we have the capacity to look at this and go, look, everything could end. Like it could all end. So why does that not pull us together on some level? And I think there's kind of a two separate mindsets, no, not just two, but a couple of mindsets on that, which are the approach of, well, we have to make sure that we can survive. And there's we should make sure everyone survives, kind of perspectives on that. And again, obviously not just the only two, but I don't know. I keep looking on this. I keep pondering through how to bring some of the division in general, whether it's in the US or in the world, together more. And I think that humanizing, this humanizing, the Twilight Zone especially, stands out as an example of how to make people, regardless of your position, regardless of your perspective, remember that people are human and fallible and terrible and wonderful. And, we are all of that.
And that society is fragile.
Right.
I do think that I won't say it's exclusively an American perspective that you've articulated. It's just that I've lived in enough countries and had enough, I'm sure you've had them too. It does have a cultural component to it, right? I mean, people who have grown up in a country that, first of all, there's a lot of countries where the country is itself a very recent notion. Right? Like I've talked to many people who their countries only existed 30 years, and they'll tell you nobody's loyal to the country. Everybody's loyal to their tribe or their clan or their socioeconomic group, and the country is like a shell game, a shell outside, right?
Sure.
And then the optimism. There's a great moment in The Sopranos. If you I don't know if you both watched. Have you watched The Sopranos? Yeah. There's
pieces of it.
A character there. She's not the Russian mistress of Tony. It's her friend who's missing a leg. And they're both Russian immigrants. Yeah. And she says, "Oh, you Americans, you always believe everything is going to turn out all right, and then you're surprised when it doesn't." In Russia, we know everything will go badly, and then we're ready when it doesn't. Some version of that. And I was born in another country which was a little bit more American than other countries east of it. But like, I believe 90% of the world does have that attitude of just assuming everything's going to go bad. I mean, I would love, there's been like 12 versions of The Office, like the Saudi Arabian Office. There's been a Israeli Office and German Office. And I'm really upset. I've never gotten to see them. I don't know why they don't show them. I think people would be interested to see them. I've just seen clips like the Saudi Arabian Office when Dwight sets the fire there and they're running around in the Saudi Arabian office. But I always wondered in a Eastern European or Sub-Saharan African or like Latin American or East Asian version of the shelter, would they have the same conversation? Or would they immediately say, okay, well, we can't have anybody of this ethnic group here. Of course, we all agree on that. They're pigs. They're evil. Right. So, like, no, and I'm not, this is not derogatory. It's just saying that the American attitude of like, can't we all live together is something that is not 100% common.
Right. Kind of unique in a lot of ways.
Yeah. There is an American exceptionalism about that. And it's interesting to talk about it. And I've had students from other cultures actually look at this episode and say, yeah, that's not the way it would happen in my country.
Yeah, makes sense.
That's wild. And it's good as Americans to even hear that conversation, to go, as for a lot of times, I think there's a lot of, as bad as we think we are sometimes, and it's not like it's a judgment of good or bad. It's just the cultural thing we're used to that we grew up with. Yeah. Interesting.
Deep stuff. Is there any other things you wanted to address in the story, Joe, or?
No, I think that's about it. I think we've covered a lot of aspects of it. And again, thank you, Professor, for all your input. Is really great to have you on here to really tear this thing open and look at it from a lot of different aspects.
Yeah, well, we really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. And again, the Rod Serling and the Twilight Zone, the gift that keeps on giving for now 70 years, right? And just 65, just amazing.
So we'll have you back for sure, Prof. And thanks again, everybody, for listening at home or the office.
Thanks, everybody.